Good morning, Ms. Calverts class. All right, this is our first lesson for Domain 11. It's called Daniel Boone and the Opening of the West. Today, people from all over the world live together in communities from one end of the North American continent to the other, from the Atlantic Ocean in the east to the Pacific Ocean in the west and everywhere in between. This map of North America shows in the United States in green. You can see lots of thin lines outlining the states that make up our country, the United States of America. However, hundreds of years ago, the map of the United States was much smaller than it is today. Long, long ago, the only people who lived on the continent of North America were people known as Native Americans. Native Americans have lived in North America for thousands of years. Native Americans lived in both seasonal and permanent villages. So if they lived in seasonal villages, they lived in sort of houses that you could move from season to season. So that would be if we lived in tents today. They used great knowledge of the land and its resources to create a great number of villages and cultures. At the same time, far away on the other side of the ocean, many other people had their own towns and villages. These people lived on the continent of Europe and were known as Europeans. So this is the yellow part here. That's Europe. About 600 years ago, Europeans began to leave their lands and sail to other parts of the world, seeking spices, gold, and other riches. Some of these explorers arrived in North America. So we know that they came here to North America. Some went actually to South America. Others went here to South Africa. And some even sailed way down here and all the way around to Asia. Imagine how surprised Native Americans and Europeans must have been to see each other. People who looked, dressed, and spoke very differently from themselves. The early explorers who came to North America were mostly interested in finding goods and riches that they could take back to Europe to sell. Many of these explorers learned vital skills from the Native Americans. Vital skills are crucial or extremely important to somebody's survival. The Native Americans knew the land very well. They taught the Europeans many skills, including hunting, fishing, gathering, and farming. In exchange for their help, Europeans brought things to trade with the Native Americans, such as cloth. For many years, Europeans traveled back and forth across the Atlantic Ocean. Some Europeans were content to just trade with the Native Americans, but others became interested in starting settlements because they wanted to live on the continent as well. Settlements are places where people can make their homes in a new land. The English started two early settlements in North America in the 1600s. Plymouth, in what is now Massachusetts, and Jamestown, in what is now Virginia. So there was one other, but it wasn't able to start a settlement because it disappeared about 2 years after it was started. Does anybody remember the name? That was called Roanoke. At Plymouth, the Native Americans helped the settlers survive. Do you remember how at Plymouth they celebrated their harvest together? The first Thanksgiving in America? The Europeans would not have been able to grow the corn and squash for that meal without help from the Native Americans. As time passed, more and more Europeans arrived to start settlements in North America, even though Native Americans had been already living there in their own communities on that same land. Fights over land began to erupt as each group refused to share the land. The settlers claimed that most of the land on the east coast of the United States, land where the Native Americans had already been living for many years. The word claimed means that the English said that the land belonged to them, even though the Native Americans had been living there. The British formed colonies or settlements ruled by faraway Great Britain from Massachusetts all the way to Georgia. Eventually, some of the more adventurous settlers wanted to explore land to the west of them. One of these people was a young man by the name of Daniel Boone. Daniel Boone was born in 1734 near the town of Reading, Pennsylvania. His father and mother owned a farm. Daniel and his brothers and sisters all helped their parents plow the fields on the farm, but Daniel was never content in the open fields. He was curious about life in the woods around their farm and spent as much time as possible creating paths through the forest. He made friends with the young Native American boys who lived in the wooded areas. They taught Daniel how to move silently through the forest and how to trap wild animals and catch fish in the streams. Daniel's father, seeing how interested Daniel was in hunting, taught Daniel how to use a special type of gun called a rifle. It was common for people to learn hunting and surviving skills during this time in history, which is very different from today. Today, most people have the option to buy food and clothing rather than hunting for their resources themselves. One day, while helping his father plow the fields, Daniel asked if he could be allowed to help out the family in another way. "Father," he said, "since you taught me to shoot a rifle, I've practiced and practiced until I'm the best shot for miles around. Let me hunt for food for our family?" Daniel's father agreed, and soon the Boones were feasting on wild turkey and deer. In 1750, just before Daniel turned 16, the Boone family moved from Pennsylvania to the Yadkin River Valley of North Carolina, settling at the edge of the frontier. It did not take long for the other settlers in his new home to discover that Daniel was one of the best woodsmen for miles around. A woodsman is a person who lives or works in the woods. Daniel Boone lived and worked in the forest. Daniel began to explore his new surroundings. His explorations took him deep into the forest. He heard tales of buffalo to the west and wanted to try hunting other animals than the plentiful deer and bear that lived in the woods nearby. But Daniel was unable to go as far west as he wanted to go. Something was stopping him and other settlers from traveling farther west. Can you guess what it was? What do you think it is? There was enormous mountains standing in his way. These mountains are called the Appalachian Mountains, and they stretch for miles from the present-day state of Maine all the way to Georgia. The mountains were heavily wooded, making them difficult to cross. They formed a natural barrier and blocked movement from one side of the mountains to the other. For this reason, few European settlers had left their colonies along the eastern coast of North America to travel west. But Daniel knew that Native Americans had crisscrossed these mountains for years. As he roamed through the densely forested hillsides, curiosity about the land to the west grew stronger. Daniel began to ask everyone he met if they knew a way to cross the mountains. Alrighty, everybody, some of the questions I want you to think about as we go into our craft for today. What do you know about Daniel Boone? What have we learned from this chapter? Where did he grow up? Where did he want to go? And why did Daniel Boone and the other English settlers want to go west? What kept the English settlers from moving farther west? And what is the mountain range called? Alrighty, everybody, I hope you have a great day.